come up with innovative but pragmatic recommendations. You will get that paper back after spring break. You will present it to the class. We will deconflict that for MSFS students, so you don't have to do your presentation and your orals on the same day. Don't worry, we're very much aware that you have other requirements for your degrees. Then, and this is where the capstone becomes different, the 10 or 11 of you in each capstone will then work together as a team and come up with one policy paper that doesn't staple your papers together, but weaves them together. So you will have to decide on what is the narrative, how much, the different history, who are the main players, and then what are the policy challenges and what are the policy recommendations. For most students, you have gone through your academic careers writing papers for classes, and you've written them well because you got into Georgetown and you're looking to graduate from Georgetown soon. But whatever paper you write, the student on your right and your left, it's irrelevant to your paper. Your paper is your paper solely. In the outside world, I'm not going to call it the real world because I'm not really sure how real it is sometimes, but the policy world out there that you want to get into. You may be the policy entrepreneur, you have the idea, the recommendation, but in order to move it forward, or if you're going to have to work with all the other offices in whatever agency or NGO or think tank or wherever you land. And then you're going to have to shop it around outside. And so even though the best policy papers they won't even have a name on them. They're assumed to be written by one main writer, but you have to negotiate everything that's in that paper before it goes up your chain of command. So what we're trying to replicate in the capstone is this idea that I have dug deep. I have really looked at a key issue. I know what a key issue is. I know what the recommendations ought to be. But now I have to go work with all the other people who work on that issue from a slightly different perspective. So it's real. After you have finally written this, and I will say that probably halfway through writing the joint report, you hate us. Because we're sending it back and no, you need a common voice, you need a single voice, your recommendations are bouncing off of each other. We will really push you on how you do this. And then one day there's going to be a wonderful eureka moment where all of a sudden all the pieces fall together and you have a beautiful report and you kind of go, holy tadpoles, we did this. You will then take this beautiful piece of work and you will present it to a panel of senior practitioners who, I will say, they do read it and they do really look at the ideas and have in many cases either taken the report itself or asked for some of the individual papers because they really want to move them forward. And just to give you a small example, I used to do reconstructing Yemen before I gave up. I had a student who was very much into energy. He wanted to write a paper on, bringing electricity back to Yemen. Good idea. He wanted to look at oil and gas. I happen to know there is no oil and gas, or at least not enough in Yemen. But go ahead, give it a try. He comes back in a few weeks and says, there isn't enough oil and gas to do this. Yeah, I know. But you needed to find out. He said, the Yemenis are using, those small solar panels you see that power like a temporary traffic light. Yemenis had these things all over their houses. He said, maybe one of the things we can do is why don't we skip the traditional oil, gas, power plant, power line and go straight to solar. It's one thing Yemen has a lot of because they have no trees. And so he wrote this great paper on how to bring electricity and power by solar power. And it got picked up by the World Bank and USAID, and everybody went, they were so, and this is true, as my colleagues will confirm, that the people in the policy world, NGO, think tank, everything else, are so focused on today's problem and solving today's problem that they sometimes can't step back and just think. And so what we do is we take 10 to a dozen of Georgetown's brightest graduate students, give them 13 weeks to really look at the issue and really think of some new approaches and new ideas. I had another student who did a paper on how do we better coordinate our humanitarian and development assistance with the Arab Gulf states so that we're not playing bum cop. Paper got picked up by all sorts of people. So the papers you're writing are real, and they can have a real impact. The process is as close as we can replicate to what you're going to be confronting outside. And I think it's a wonderful sense of satisfaction. It's far more intellectually challenging, but also intellectually satisfying to kind of see where your niche paper fits into a broader issue and how it can also play off of another issue and be complemented by another issue. Or sometimes there's a conflict, and how do you negotiate that? So that's what we're trying to do with Capstone. We have, you can see previous capstones on our website and get a feel for what these look like. And if you really do see one that you're interested in, you can also see synopses of the papers that went into the report. So you can, if you're really interested, you can kind of take a look at, okay, these were the 10 papers. This is how it looked when it was finally finished. So it's a great process, but it's going to be a little different from what you've seen before. Process on getting into a capstone. Because it is required for the certificate, we pre-register you in the capstones before open registration. So you will have a seat. We will have sent to you tomorrow, watch your emails, please watch your email, an application form where you just tell me who you are, you tell me your first two choices, why. If there's one that you cannot do because you have a class conflict or something, let me know. And I will then place you in your first or second choice. I will let you know which one you're in, and then we will pre-register you. So that will be all locked and loaded before this goes live to the general student population, graduate student population. So your job is to get, you're gonna get it tomorrow. If you could get it to me by Tuesday. I teach on Monday, so I'm not gonna look at it. So if you get, I won't. So if you can get it to me by Tuesday, I will go through it very quickly and we will get the rest of the process on our side done. So that's the basic course, that's the basic process. The capstones are always taught by one of our senior state fellows. ISD has the honor and the pleasure of hosting 7 State Department officers and 4 or 5 military officers every year, and the senior state officers very kindly agreed to do these capstones. So you're going to be working with somebody who has been through this kind of process and has worked on this issue, whatever their issue is, very deeply. So you're going to have an A-team director. For those of you who are curious, when I'm talking about senior state officials and you look at this guy and you kind of go, he don't look any older than I am. He's not. Ambassador Story is couldn't come today, and Rafa is actually a survivor of a capstone. And so he can also answer any questions that you may have on, what does it look like from a student side? Because I think that's important. So any questions just so far? Yes, sir.
So just with the note on, I think all of these, that it fulfills the requirement, but also non-students can take it. If we wanted to take one of these classes to satisfy an elective requirement, like if just two of them sound really cool, can we do one of them for the ISD certificate capstone and the other one just take it like any normal class?
You want to take 2 capstones? I mean, you can.
Don't do it, don't do it.
You can.
One is.
Okay.
One is really
Okay.
enough.
Got it, yeah.
We did have a previous student who took 2 capstones, but he took them 2 years in a row.
That sounds
Not some will
smart.
say, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be here that long.
You will, if the capstone is doing what it's supposed to do, you will not have the time, energy, bandwidth, or emotional resilience. to
You're
do
selling
so.
this beautifully.
Yes, I don't want anybody surprised. Yes, sir.
This is a very detailed like logistical issue, but since we don't yet know our other classes and there might be some like core requirements for our degrees outstanding, is it possible to like
Shift.
switch and shift?
Yes, you can. The one thing that I would ask is that if you decide you need to shift, that you let me know as soon as possible,
Absolutely. Yeah,
because then I'm gonna have to rearrange the deck chairs.
yeah,
And because after I have all of you placed, and as I said, you have priority, any open spaces also go to general students to register. And we do have non-certificate students who decide to take our capstones. So we want to be able to accommodate them. So if you need to shift, let me know ASAP. If you decide that I have done a remarkable selling job and that you really don't want to do this, let me know. I would hate to have you do it. I think it's a wonderful format.
yeah.
The students who do it, I think, find it extremely useful. But if I have horrified you, let me know.
No, it's just like purely from like a
Yeah, yeah.
requirement perspective.
I understand. Another thing, are there any majors or, okay, series, anybody who has like a thesis they have to do in the second semester? Okay. For when you're picking your topic, I've worked with both the directors of, I've worked with the directors of all the programs that have those kinds of requirements for their degree. And the deal that we have with you all is, I'll use an example. I had a student in my aero golf class, and she was writing her thesis for Magus on Macron's foreign policy thing. And so what she did for my capstone was, what is France doing in the Persian Gulf? How does it reflect what Macron is doing? And then also, how does it support Western interests? So it was like one body of research and one thinking through of an issue. And then she does a slightly adjacent piece. So she doesn't have to do a whole new research. And I suppose in theory, if you could come up with one research that you can write 2 separate papers for 2 different capstones, you could do that. You could do his New World Order and his Great Game.
Those are the 2 that I'm attracted to.
Yeah, if you can figure out a way to do 2 related papers so that you're not killing yourself with the research, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that.
Mine's at 9:30 on Wednesdays.
I like morning classes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Have these papers ever been published? And if so, where, and does the program in England facilitate that?
They can be published. I'm not. I know one of them was actually published by the State Department. They actually picked it up and made it a State Department paper. And another one was once picked up by the World Bank. So, if it's of quality and you know a place that you want to publish it, we will help facilitate that. Absolutely. Absolutely. We will help you write a paper that is publishable quality. Absolutely. Anything else on just general? Yes, ma'am.
When it comes to advocating for which one we're choosing 1 and 2. Do you want us to think what value add we would be to the course, or what's our why?
Well, first of all, the fact that you called it a why statement, I love you. Why is my favorite word. How you would be value added to the class. I bring this perspective to the issue would be one why. And then your second why is how is this also value added to what you're doing? So value added to you, value added to me. If you can put both of those in your why statement, that would be fabulous. Okay. Yes, sir.
I was asking for some clarity on the language requirement, for the CR people in the room. I know it's a different requirement than
Ah.
SFS, and I've heard conflicting,
Stories.
yes.
Okay. So you don't have a language requirement?
So we do, and so for instance, for us, is our language requirement for CR was fulfilled through our undergraduate language courses.
Okay, let me just rephrase it.
Okay.
CR has a language requirement.
Correct.
However you satisfy your degree's language requirement satisfies it for me.
Fabulous.
Great.
Okay,
That's all we needed to hear.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I am not asking you to go out and learn a whole new language.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is
That's good.
not fair.
I can't.
I'm still working on English.
Yeah.
So, despite the best efforts of the State Department to get me, qualified in other languages, I'm still working on English.
Cool.
Also, if you are a non-native speaker of English, if English is your second language, you have satisfied the language requirement. So, yeah. So I think, the only people who get a little bit caught in this is SSP. That's you? Okay.
Cheers.
Huh? Yeah, for SSP students, what we do, hoping that you have basic familiarity in some language, we will arrange for you to have a very basic proficiency test with whatever the language department is here. And we've never had anybody fail it. So if you can, satisfy it with your own degree, or we'll get you, if you speak Montenegrin, which is my language of last familiar, my last contact, we'll figure out how to do that. Yes,
Proficiency level, is it like equivalent to like the TO?
I know the State Department ones, so it's kind of like depends on the language. If it's Chinese, it's 2. If it's Spanish, it's 3.
Okay,
I think that's kind of how we are.
great.
Yes, sir.
How many people typically work on one paper?
The deep dive paper is one student, one per student. The joint report is all 10 or so together,
The entire task?
the entire task force or capstone, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Roughly how long is each paper, like both the individual one and the joint one?
The individual papers run 20-25 pages, with footnotes, graphs, photographs, anything else to make it look right. Is that too bad?
No, that's better than what I was expecting.
Okay, and then this is my reality check guy.
Sure. Yeah. Zero filter. I'm
Yeah, exactly.
in the front.
In the front, asking all the questions, nodding, don't play poker. You rate, you have poker on your face. The joint report is probably also about 25 to 30 pages of text. Yeah. And you will generally find that, your problem is not getting up to that level, but stopping at that level.
Because you have 11 people trying to pitch in. Also, to be clear, the first half of the capstone is your individual paper, and then you start the individual. They're not doing both at the same time.
Okay, last question, and then we need to get to the pitches. Yes, ma'am.
Talk a little bit more about the skills that you mentioned and you will gain this for the professional world. For example, how would you translate these skills into the State Department or different jobs?
Yeah. There's a number of skills. Okay, one, we're gonna really help work on your writing skills. Some students write very well, some students a little bit less so, but you tend to write academic style. And there is a different approach to writing policy papers. So we will help you make the transition from the academic writing to the policy relevant, that again, if you're at Mercy Corps or MEI or the State Department or wherever, it's a different writing approach. So we will help you with your writing skills. You will have to present, so you're gonna get a little bit of practice on that. Intellectually, it's gonna be, how do I deep dive on an issue, really understand its roots, understand the players, and then come up with can we actually do about it? Because again, out there, what distinguishes the people in the policy world, wherever that may be, from just, again, an academic paper, is not just understanding the issue, but being able to come up with what one of my bosses said, so what? Okay, so you told me all about the problem. So what? What do we do about it? You know, and who do we need to work with? And how do we do it? And so we're gonna get you to do that too. And working as a team is probably one of the most important skills you're gonna get from a capstone. Because again, outside the gate, you don't just write something, drop it, and it goes out and is published. You have to work it through your organization, you have to work it through partner organizations, you have to work it with whatever governments you have to work it with, You will be working as a team on policy for the next 20, 30, however many years you do it. And so really learning, how do you work as a team? How do you take 10 different perspectives and bring them into something coherent is a skill that most academic classes don't give you practice on. And it's probably one of the most important skills that you're going to have. How do I work with others on an issue? And so, and we do joke that, you know, the first time you guys write a paper, you do it like 5-year-olds playing soccer. Everybody's running around the field trying to kick the ball and trying to get equal time. And I can tell you the first version of joint report is trash. Because you don't know what you're doing. You haven't done it before. And then you start learning to be a little bit more of a team. Who has what strength? Who's really good at the graphics and format? Who's very good at this? Who's very good at that? And you become a little bit like an NFL team where running backs run, tackles tackle, you know, and we just ran all the way through everything I know about NFL. And so, but it's learning that different people will bring different skill sets and that together, you know, Tom Brady might be the greatest of all time, but he didn't win all those games by himself. He won because everybody else on the teams were doing their job at the right time and the right way and gave him everything he needed. He got all the credit, but it was a team. So we're trying to move you from 5-year-old soccer to NFL team approach. Okay? Yes, sir.
Really quickly, what role do you foresee quantitative methods playing?
There are some topics where a lot of quantitative
Yeah.
analysis is useful.
Okay.
Yeah. And the ability to find, understand, interpret, and then apply data is definitely part of doing this. So absolutely.
And if you can bring that strength, bring it.
Yeah.
Because in my group, we
I
have,
can't, but.
well, bring it. Because in the jury reports, in our case last year, we did have 2 people that actually knew how to use data, tables.
That's what I was thinking.
That was super useful
Yeah.
for us. So,
Okay, this is the last question, then I've got to let my colleagues speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, on the quant method side, will there be a way to help students who want to learn more about that within this setting, this course, like if it's a whole other topic? And are there teaching moments with that, or is that something you should have outside if this is not the place to learn?
If you're in my capstone, you better bring it.
Okay.
I can't speak for my colleagues. I can understand data. I know how to use data. I know how to interpret data. I don't know how to manipulate data. So that's just me.
I got my worst econ grades at undergrad.
Yeah, it's something that is definitely needed now. I think there's a little bit of a generational issue on it. I also went to, you know, a school that didn't require quantitative analysis, which is why I picked it. But I do think it's important, but we're not gonna be able to, we can advise, but can't teach, knowing my limits. Okay, I want to let my colleagues talk about their individual capstone, what they're trying to do, what they're looking for, and make their pitch. I'm gonna start with Mustafa.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Mustafa Kopal. This is my second year as a State Department fellow, so I'm delighted to be here. I taught the course last semester, actually earlier this year. So with my colleague from the Pentagon, who's the military officer from Dano. This year I'll be flying solo, so I have a lot of his notes segments. But basically, the course, as you see from the title, it's called The New Great Game: Conflict and Competition in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is a vast region, and it encompasses 40 different countries. It covers a region that spans, East African coast all the way to the Pacific coast of the United States. There are a lot of different players in this dynamic. The most prominent ones, the great powers of the United States and China, feature heavily in the course. And the course is basically, an opportunity for students to delve into the sort of the key political, economic, social dynamics at play in this region. Looking at how the policies have evolved depending on the country. We look at China, how China devises its Indo-Pacific policy. We look at the United States. We look at some of the key middle states, influential states like Japan and South Korea. We look at Southeast Asian states, influential players like Indonesia, Vietnam. The course is not about Chinese history or the PRC at large or sort of a deep dive into China. There are plenty of other courses that offer that. Folks, quite frankly, who have deep expertise on China. So I certainly recommend if you are interested in China, to explore those as well. This course basically, is a broad swath of the overlapping interests that impact the dynamic in the Indo-Pacific. How does the United States define its interests? What are some of the tools it's using to protect its interests in the region? Same for China, same for India. We bring in guest speakers that have some specific expertise to complement the coursework. The purpose of this capstone is not sort of to provide students with sort of a list of definitive solutions, but it's intended to encourage you to determine what questions need to be asked and to kind of develop creative solutions that address them. Our students last year in every capstone is limited to about 10 students, which I think is a pretty healthy size. As Barbara mentioned, you write an individual paper. You start that at the initial part of the semester. You submit the final product at the end of the semester. And in between that, you're doing an oral presentation and you're contributing to the joint report as part of a teamwork exercise. Our class last year produced a paper on how to leverage alliances and partnerships more effectively to contain the PRC, China in this case, with respect to its activities in the Indo-Pacific. We will look at the security dimension, we'll look at the economic dimensions. There's so much at play in this region. Secretary Blinken has referred to China, and the challenge of China in this region as the basic challenge for the United States. And it's a consequential region because it has ripple effects across the board, not just contained in the Indo-Pacific, but its economic implications impact the United States, impact Latin America, Europe, et cetera, so across the world. It is a big topic, and so we have to be strategic in terms of how we delve into it, because it's impossible to cover all the key issues. But it will give you an opportunity to get more familiarized with the dynamics of the Indo-Pacific, why it's relevant, because it is quite relevant, how it plays into the broader global geopolitics in the 21st century. And we'll give you a chance to delve into specific topics of interest that you might want to look at. We had students looking at the EU's policies with regards to the Indo-Pacific. We had others looking at how do we leverage DPRK with regards to China's posture. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you write on, but it has to be contained within the coursework. So that in a nutshell is class. And all the classes will have the same requirements for papers or report length. So there's a consistent thing.
Yeah, I want to underscore one thing that Mustafa just said about capstones. Again, going back to some of your question, is it's not, it is what you learned in the course of doing your deep dive. It is what you learn in the course of doing the joint report. But going forward again, your careers, it's really learning what are the questions to ask. You know, what do I need to learn? What do I need to understand? Because I think for most of us, where our careers took us is very different from where our careers started. I started as an Asianist, I ended up as an Arabist. And knowing how to think about new problems, how to confront a challenge, an awful lot of this, well, almost everything I worked on in my career, I never took a course on because the world was changing so quickly. We didn't have, you know, China didn't exist as a power. Cyber terrorism, women's empowerment, democratization. Most of the issues I worked on were not part of the curriculum. And so it's that ability to think, to ask questions, to know how to analyze new data that we're really trying to help you get.
The only thing I would add is that at the end, you do a panel presentation. And for our course last year, you have 3 members on the panel who are practitioners. We had 2 senior officials from the State Department and an academic who actually is now teaching at Georgetown, an expert on China, whose book we used for the China portion of the class. And he was at the White House working on U.S.-China policy. So the students were able to present their joint report to the panel, and they had a Q&A session, and everyone would do just irrespective of the capstone you're in. And I was able to present a copy of the joint report to my former boss, who was the Deputy Secretary of State. And in the department, the Deputy Secretary of State is the lead China, sort of the senior China desk officer. So during my time as her chief of staff, we worked extensively on Indo-Pacific issues, our relationship with Japan and South Korea, Vietnam, and China in particular, and India. So it's a fascinating part of the world, and I would, if anyone has an interest in terms of new great game. The reason we call it the new great game is the original great game was the 19th century geopolitical battle between the British Empire and Russia, and it focused on Central Asia. And it was the 2 great powers kind of pivoting and competing against each other with several states in the middle. So I thought that it was a sort of good descriptor.
It was a good title.
Yeah.
It's a good title. It's a catchy title. It's also accurate. Chris?
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. It's actually an honor to have a chance to speak with all of you. I'm Chris Klein. I am a fellow at ISD as well. This is also my 2nd year teaching, and I have not taught Capstone before, but I've taught a graduate level course on multilateral diplomacy, and I'll be doing that again in the spring semester as well as the Capstone. And I will say that even though I've served extensively in East Asia, I wish I could sign up for your course. That's not to denigrate my own. It does sound really interesting. So I want to start out with 4 questions because we were talking about the importance of asking questions. My first question is, and you guys are going to have to answer it. Who here thinks that climate change is a problem that can be solved by one country alone?
Okay, no hands. Moving on.
Okay, moving on. Who thinks that pandemics can be solved by one country acting alone?
Same thing.
Okay, let's move along. Now this is where it gets a little bit more dicey. Who thinks that the UN should play a role in resolving and mediating the crises in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Africa, and elsewhere?
Okay.
Some more.
Oh, there's a lot of you in this.
Okay. And now, who thinks, this is the last question, I promise. Who thinks that the current multilateral system is sufficient for this moment?
Oops.
Nobody. That's interesting. Well, this is exactly what we're going to dig into in my class, my capstone class. we're going to try to figure out whether the current multilateral system, really anchored by the United Nations, because that's been the anchor since the end of World War II. But we'll look at some other multilateral entities as well, and try to figure out if they're sufficient for what we're all facing. We'll do this really by carefully looking at the 4 pillars of the UN. I said I promised no more questions, but does anyone know what the 4 pillars are?
Oops. Oh,
Sir.
Peace and security, human rights, rule of law, and development plus climate change.
That's exactly right.
It's 5, it's that, parenthetical you might
Yeah,
call
it's
it.
funny. I mean, climate change has really become a 5th pillar without it being officially a 5th pillar. So that's how we're going to do it. And I think that it's going to be very interesting because, we're at a really important moment. We're going to use what we learn to make some judgment calls about the current system, about its performance, and possibly make some decisions about whether it can be salvaged, whether it can be improved, and also maybe what some of the member states want out of it. And as someone who's worked in China and lived in Russia, I will bring sort of a great power competition aspect to how we examine these issues. As a group, we'll work together as Barbara discussed, and we will put together some sort of comprehensive proposal for how to make a multilateral system that responds more successfully to present crises and is able to do so in a more, I would say, relevant, resilient, and reliable way. Now, I wanted to say a little bit about my teaching style and my teaching philosophy. I hadn't done it before I came to Georgetown, but I've learned since I have come here and taught now 3 times a course, that my teaching philosophy is pretty similar to my management philosophy, which is that I want to do everything I can to help the team succeed. Now, I know that everyone on the team has to do their bit of heavy work, and there's no question about it. But that is something that I feel very, very strongly about. And I want to also, this is again something that I feel strongly about. I want, as a class, I want us to be able to look back on what we worked on and feel like that we are proud of what we came up with and proud of how we worked together. So I look forward to that very much. With that, I really strongly welcome you to sign up for my class. I hope you do. I do try to make it as energetic and interesting as possible. I have that 2 p.m. slot on Thursdays for this. And if you're like me, I definitely have food comas, which is why I make sure to have a big coffee before I come in. I try to make it interesting. We'll have guest speakers. We'll have group exercises starting probably pretty early so that you have a little bit of experience in that once you head into the sort of larger group project. And I also pride myself on my responsiveness. So as you go forward in the class, I will, of course, be at your disposal to discuss many of the difficult issues. I want to emphasize that the class, though it does deal with, and the title of the class is Global Disorder, as opposed to Global Order, that although, it might seem like we're dealing with kind of arcane diplomatic kabuki, I think it's very important to look at the individual interests of states who make up the membership of these organizations that we're going to be talking about. Stop there. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you in class.
All of my students get free Tesla.
yeah, what?
Free Tesla.
The charging station, however, is on you.
Yeah, he already has one, so he knows.
Yeah. Okay, this is clearly not Ambassador Jimmy's story. Jimmy is one of the State Department's preeminent Latin Americanist. He is in his 2nd year. He did teach this capstone last spring, and Rafa was one of the members. So he is going to fill in for Ambassador Story.
Yeah.
Rafa?
And I'm gonna try to be very transparent, very honest, because, you know, we're all in this together. I'm gonna try to give answers to 3 questions. What are we gonna do in this capstone? Why to do it and how to do it? So the name of the capstone is very carefully chosen. It's the rise of illiberal states. So this is not about dictatorships, autocracies, Venezuela, no. This is about democracies that, despite our democracies, they're a bit illiberal. So we're gonna be looking at the case, for example, of El Salvador or Nicaragua, or which is quite good because maybe you don't know a lot about Latin America, but you're actually interested in democratic backsliding, human rights. You can use this capstone as a perfect case study because right now there is a region in the world that is backsliding when it comes to democratic terms. That's Latin America. That would be the first cornerstone. The second pillar is China. China is being very active right now in Latin America. The biggest port that is going to exist in the Western Hemisphere, the Puerto de Chancay, is going to be built in Peru, completely controlled and managed by China. We're going to also be studying how the influence of China changed the dynamics. And then the third point, which for me was the most interesting one, is that we will try to come up with a strategy on how the US should deal with these awkward threats. How the US should deal with Bukele, for example, or with Maduro, when we have Chevron getting oil from there every day. Or how should we deal with Petro in Colombia that is denouncing a coup that right now because they're investigating the electoral campaign? Or how should we deal, I don't know, with Claudia Sheinbaum, that now all the judges are going to be elected by the people in Mexico from now onwards? That for me was the most interesting section of those 3 that I said. And obviously you have someone like Ambassador Story, who was, now you will know because you have the bio, but he was the last US ambassador to Venezuela before we recognized Guaido. He was also very involved in those efforts. So I think he's a very actually authorized voice to talk about this. So that's the what, to keep it simple. The how does it work? Ambassador Story, every other class, he will bring a guest speaker. And when I say guest speaker, he will bring Juan Guaido, he will bring Leopoldo Lopez. I'm saying names, so you have a good picture. Human rights leaders, activists, that's gonna be a great component of the capstone. Also, readings, you will have to do readings. Most of these are contemporary readings, foreign affairs articles. Readings that you can do, you need like 3 hours to do them, but it will really get you the main concepts and the main components, which honestly I really like. When you can read something in 40 minutes and you get the concept, you don't have to be like 3 hours reading a book. So I really like that. And then most of the class, he does lecture a bit, but most of the class is actually a discussion. We'll have people coming from a lot of different programs. So everyone's going to be seeing the problem from different angles. We have people coming from the Latin American Studies program. They're all about the history of Latin America. We cannot understand Bukele. We don't understand the Civil War. Okay, great. But then we'll also have people coming from the program of migration. And they will say, okay, well, all the migration we're getting in the US, why is it coming? Because of all these practices. So all the angles are very cool. And I would say that maybe 70% of the seminar was actually a discussion. He would moderate the discussion, but it's very student-driven. So that's the how. And then finally, why would I do this course? As you know, Biden administration has said that the threat to democracy is right now the #1 threat. In Latin America, you have the perfect example. So whatever you learn in Latin America, even if afterwards you don't want to work on Latin America anymore, you will always be able to actually define how democratic backsliding works and operates, not only in a country, but in an entire region. Because every week we'll be seeing different countries. It's not going to be all about Venezuela. Obviously, he knows a lot about Venezuela, but he also knows a lot about Nicaragua, El Salvador, lots of countries, Colombia. And also, and this is something that I recommend you doing with all of the capstone leaders, check their bios, not only check their regional focus, but check their functional focus. For example, Ambassador Boris, she's been an expert on counterterrorism for many years. If you're interested in counterterrorism as well, she's a good person for that. Ambassador Story was the director of INL, of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement in the Western Hemisphere. So he knows a lot about narcotics, drugs, cartels, the Chapo, all these people. In my case, when I did my individual report, I was very interested, as what I said, in migration and how cartels and drugs collaborate in all the migration that we're getting now in the US. Having someone like Ambassador Story that has worked on this functionally allowed me to go to him and say, hey, I want to interview someone from CBP. Who can I go to? Obviously, he wouldn't know just a field agent. He would know the director of CBP for the Western Hemisphere. So I could have a coffee with him. He could help me with my individual report. This New Year's Eve, I'm going to go to the border to do research thanks to this contact that I made with the capstone. So that's also why I think that also this capstone is very good because of ambassador stories, but that applies to all of the capstones. So yeah, that's this capstone. I hope it was clear enough. And if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
And the last capstone is mine. And we have one capstone that is on the entire Indo-Pacific. We have another capstone that is on the entire Western Hemisphere. We have another capstone that is on the entire multilateral. And then so you're looking at mine and it looks like, well, you know, we're doing like 6 countries. We're the combined population of 15 million. True, not. Two of the major crises in the world right now, of course, is in the Middle East. It was Gaza, Israel, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Gaza. It's going to keep growing. What is going to come out of how far this conflict is going to go and how it is going to be resolved and how it's going to reshape not just the Middle East, but a lot of its adjacent areas and other issues is an open question, but it will. And every administration that has tried to pivot to Asia or worry about this or worry about that, the Middle East always brings them back. It is an area that we cannot ignore. The Persian Gulf area, the Persian Gulf states, despite their small size, are middle powers. They play a vastly outsized role to their population. They are, you know, every time there was a ceasefire and hostage release talk, it was Egypt, the US, and Qatar. The Omanis are major conduits for us with Iran. The Saudis and Emiratis are not only involved in Sudan, in Ethiopia, throughout Africa. What happens with oil? What happens with green technology? What happens with the transition to new energy sources is coming out of the Gulf. These are major players. We have been involved with the Gulf since 1979. Iranian Revolution, Soviets into Afghanistan, the last vestiges of the old great game. All of this kind of centers on the Gulf states. And so looking at how major middle powers play in major conflicts, how they play in new economies, how they play increasingly outside their region in ways that affect us. So it's a case study on middle powers, both as meddlers and as mediators, as economic drivers, and also people who are affected by what's going on in the outside world. It is a region where China is very active. What does that mean? What does that look like? Turkey is a major player. We are there, and these remain, despite, I think, the term awkward friends. We have many awkward friends in the Middle East, but they are still friends and we need to deal with them. How do you work with states where you also have major differences of opinion, major differences of approach, where in some ways they are working counter to what we see as our interests? So how do you work both regionally and at the same time individually? If you just talk about the Gulf states, well, you're missing the difference between the Omanis, the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Kuwaitis. So you have to deal with them individually, but you also have to understand how it operates regionally. Who affects them? How do they affect going outward? We will spend a lot of time just trying to understand who the Gulf states are and what drives them, but also very much how they have transitioned. When I first went to the Gulf as a junior officer, I will tell you, it was basically flat brown and pretty empty. I think we've all seen photographs of the Gulf states now. That is not who they are. They are modern 21st century major middle powers. And we need to rethink how we work with them as not the recipients of our security umbrella, but as partners on major issues around the world. And so if you know, again, when you're looking at what happens outside the gate in May, I think, and this is very much also Chris and Mustafa mentioned it, we need to learn and look at how do we deal with middle powers. The world is not the world of 1979 or 1990. There are major middle powers, and the United States is going to have to learn how to work within a new global order that is made up of middle powers who define their interests individually, pursue their interests irrespective, and implement that policy in very different ways. And so given the Middle East post October 7, I think looking at the Gulf states and how all these issues come together is a very interesting way of, first of all, learning that region, but it applies throughout. So those are our 4 capstones. They're extremely different, but in many ways you can hear the connections between them. And so I invite you, if it is an area that you've worked on and you want to work more deeply, that's great. If it's an area that you really haven't worked on very much, one of the best papers I've gotten in my capstone on the Gulf was written by somebody from Asian Studies, who really took a look at what China was doing in the Gulf and why and what it meant. So it's a way of also expanding what you know into another region and seeing how it's affected or affected by what's going on there. So questions or comments about any of these? Yes, sir.
Yeah, for the UN multilateral, I'm just curious who the target audience is for that final policy.
Target audience for that final policy, I think, would be the United States.
Okay. Thank you.
We can change that if we want in the class, but I think that's how I would come into it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, just to add kind of another piece to the evolving analysis of what the United States does going forward in Latin America, in Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, and the UN. We are having an election in a few weeks, and what happens is going to, yeah, I know, for those of you who may have missed it. And so there is going to be a lot of rethinking on all of these areas. And I think that's going to make this particular round of capstones even more dynamic and more interesting, because we're going to be heading into some version of a new world. So I think this is going to be particularly interesting. Yes, sir.
Thank you all for your pitches and making the choice that much harder.
Our pleasure.
Question for you, Glenn. Will the primary focus of your capstone remain with the UN, or is there an angle to explore other institutions of the multilateral order, such as NATO or the OSCE, or other mechanisms of sort of
Regionalism.
Yeah, I think
multilateral cooperation?
Right. Thank you for that question. We will certainly have a chance to look at some of the other models. The focus really is going to be the UN, just because otherwise it gets to be too big of a cake for us all to eat together. So let's, although I don't know that such a cake exists. But yes, I think we definitely will talk about those other entities. I particularly would like to focus some on the BRICS, on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and some other alternate models, including what China is doing with the BRI, and the Global Cultural Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, and the Global Security Initiative. Those things I think are going to be important for us to look at as we go through our work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if I may, just one of the things I really liked when Rafa was talking about what you get out of the class, I think a few of the basic things that I hope you would get out of my class is a good understanding of how the UN Security Council functions, a good understanding of what great powers and middle powers hope to achieve in the multilateral setting, what the multilateral system is good at and not so good at, and also understanding what the various cases are for various kinds of reform, including UN Security Council.
Any other questions or comments? Threw a lot at you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the presentations. I have a question for Rafa. I'd like to know how you balance this Capstone and the workload versus the other classes that you're taking. And I'm asking that because the next semester will be my last semester, and so I wonder about orals and if you made any sort of connections with other classes in terms of papers that you were writing.
So I mean, the first thing I would say when you asked before about the skills, I wanted to answer this, but we moved on. One of the skills you're gonna get is time management, and for real. Why? Because this is a big, I mean, the individual paper is 25 pages. This is not a paper that you can write in 2 days or a weekend like we try to do with other papers. No, it's gonna take more time. And also, these aren't the people that are gonna be grading that paper. So I mean, when I saw that Ambassador Story was gonna be grading my paper on Venezuela, I was like, okay, I had to put that on this. So it was maybe the first paper in my life that I actually started 1 month ahead, 1 month and a half ahead before the delivery. But I'm being very honest with you all because it's gonna happen. It's the only way that actually you can turn out a good paper, I would say. So you have to be ready for that as well. And if you have to balance this capstone with other classes in the semester that maybe are not that time consuming, do it because this is gonna take a lot of time. Then the second thing I would say is that the individual paper, be clever, take that chance to use it for the capstone and maybe evolve it into something similar but different for your orals, for your thesis. So when you're choosing the capstone, already think, okay, my oral, I can do it maybe about migration, whatever. Okay, then maybe I can do Ambassador Stories 1 because I can use it for that. So that would be my second. So you do like you kill two birds with one stone, basically. And then the third thing, and this is the most important thing I would say, when Ambassador Boring said before, I mentioned before, teamwork, here you're gonna get to teamwork hard. And that means that sometimes you may not be the leader because we cannot be the leaders all the time. So that's fine. I mean, my job in my capstone was doing the graphs, the layout, and the cover. I didn't present, I didn't write, but I was so proud of my graphs. And then my graphs were the State Department. But that's also, I mean, you will see, you are all a group. You are gonna be holding each other. Don't fight with each other. I wanna write, no. I mean, these are the responsibilities. I'm gonna leave from behind maybe on this. It is your last semester. Or because I have to work on that, I will do that. Or communication, interpersonal skills. I mean, that was for me the main takeaway from the capstone. Working with people, working in a team with 11 grads. Everybody's super ambitious. Everybody's trying to impress it. That's quite a thing. So yeah, time, teamwork, and use it for something. Like use this as the beginning and the departing point for something.
And just to underscore that, you can absolutely use what you're working on in the capstone as the basis for your oral. So again, just use a slice of it for the oral. And then for those in Magus, we kind of flip it. You know what you're doing for your thesis in Magus or in some of the other programs. And we will work with you on figuring out, okay, what's the adjacent so that you can draw on your other research and work. So we're really trying to make it work. I would say the joint report part is very much, it's more intensive on the team work part. Because you've already done the research. You've already come up with, okay, so how do we now put this together? So you're not doing additional research for the joint report. You're figuring out how to weave it into a joint report. And that's a different set of almost more personal and different intellectual skills than the research and writing. And then again, different people do different things. Everybody trying to be the leader is what I meant by the 5-year-olds playing soccer, is that everyone wants to be in charge of the joint report and it doesn't work. And then learning, I'm better at the graphics, I'm better at the format, I'm better at that, I can do that. And then someone else can do another piece. That's a team.
It's a very unique course. I mean, I did my undergrad here and went to Fletcher for grad school. And in grad school, we didn't have a class of this format. And what I found very unique about it is if you look at the 14 weeks, 8 weeks are lectures. The remaining 6 are a combination of 2 weeks for the oral presentations that you give to your classmates. And then the last 3 weeks are you and your colleagues refining the joint report for presentation to the panel. And the final product can have an impact. And when I sent the team's report last year on China to the China desk, it's a huge desk in the department. It's comprised of over 40 people, the largest operation, interagency, unprecedented for the State Department in terms of its scope and kind of makeup. And they took on several of the recommendations that were in that paper because we're always looking for new ideas. And when people come to an issue set, they may not necessarily have to be an expert, but they may have expertise or exposure to other issues that are relevant to that topic and can bring a different perspective. And then with that different perspective, they can come up with creative ways of looking at something that the experts may not have looked at because they're so focused on the day-to-day tactical.
Yeah.
That this is your chance to think strategically, and you're operating as sort of a red cell team for the State Department or whatever government agency, where you have the luxury of time to sort of look at this issue set with your colleagues. You put 10 brains together, and you can come up with some creative solutions. So that's what I found fascinating about the class.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that, I've been doing a capstone, like format for maybe 15 years. And I am always deeply impressed by the new perspective, the new ideas, the new way of looking at the question. Because you have the time and you have the intelligence and you have the education to do this. And so I think it is a very rewarding process to go through. But it does take some time management and also, I will stress, keeping in touch with the course director. Again, different programs there are the orals for MSFS. I think Asian Studies has a big comprehensive they have to do. Different programs have different end of semester requirements. Let your director know what some of those due dates are so that we can accommodate you, work around it. As I said, one of the objectives of the capstones is not to kill you, but to help you get through this process. So yeah, and even in terms of again, sort of looking at an issue differently, Linda Thomas Greenfield did one of these on South Sudan. And there were two students from the Latin American studies who didn't know why they were in the South Sudan one, but they had been working on transitional justice for Colombia and said, well, one of the big issues in Sudan is transitional justice. So you take what you've learned and what you've done and what you understand about transitional justice and see how it fits in a different environment. See what lessons you can bring that are new perspective. And then which things that you were doing in Colombia were Colombia specific. And I need to think about transitional justice a little bit more broadly to see how it applies in different areas. So this is a way of you taking what you know and growing it from that. For conflict resolution, folks, boy, do we have a conflict in the Middle East, so we could use some good ideas on how to get that under control. So think about what the issues are, and then, yeah, we want you to solve the Middle East by, by May.
13 weeks.
Yeah, you got 13 weeks
Sweet.
to, yeah, no problem at
Pay my
all.
tuition, we'll talk.
Right. But think about the substance of what you do or the region that you do, and think if there is a new and different way to look at it and bring that expertise to one of these 4 questions. As I said, one of the best papers I got on the Gulf was from someone from Asian Studies who took everything she knew about China and then looked at a part of the world that she probably couldn't have found on a map the day before class. But she was willing to give that a try. She was willing to stretch into a new region to understand what does China do in other regions. Why, how is it seen, what is good, what is bad? So think of it that way. Okay, any other questions? Please, if you have friends, colleagues who are in the certificate and weren't able to join us today, this is the video of this and the handouts and the application are all going to be sent to everybody on our student list tomorrow. Please look at it, please fill it in. If you have a big question, either reach out to the one of us who is doing the capstone. Or if you don't know who to ask the question, or send it to me. Okay? Anything else?
There are also 3 reports outside, so you can check them to see how they finally look.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.